April 11, 1951, Tokyo, Japan. General Douglas MacArthur is asleep in the American embassy. He has been Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Far East for nearly 6 years. He ruled Japan after World War II, rebuilt the country, and even helped write its constitution. At 71 years old, 5 stars on his uniform, he is one of the most famous military leaders in the world, expecting to retire from Tokyo on his own terms, with full ceremony and honor. Suddenly, an aide wakes him with urgent news. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune has called, asking for comment. Comment on what? MacArthur is confused. He hasn't been relieved of command, but there is no mistake. Colonel Sidney Huff, MacArthur's closest aide, turns on the radio. Commercial radio stations are broadcasting the news. President Truman has fired General Douglas MacArthur. He has been relieved of all commands. General Matthew Ridgway will replace him. MacArthur sits in stunned silence. He is learning that he has been fired by listening to a radio broadcast. The President of the United States has dismissed him without warning, without personal notification, without even the courtesy of a phone call or private message. After 52 years of military service, after leading Allied forces to victory in the Pacific, after being one of the most decorated soldiers in American history, Douglas MacArthur is finding out he has been fired from a news announcer. Turning to his wife, Zhang, he says just 5 words. "Jeannie, we're going home at last. No rage, no cursing, no breakdown, just those 5 quiet words." Then MacArthur goes back to bed. He doesn't call Washington. He doesn't issue a statement. He doesn't even stay up to hear more news. He simply goes back to sleep. This reaction is not what anyone expected. MacArthur is famous for his ego, his dramatic speeches, and his theatrical personality. People expect him to explode with fury, to denounce Truman, to fight back immediately. Instead, he says 5 calm words and goes to sleep. But over the next few weeks, MacArthur will have plenty to say. He will return to America as a conquering hero, give the most emotional speech of his life to Congress, go on a speaking tour that draws millions, and shake American politics to its core. To understand why this moment happened, we need to look at the breakdown in the relationship between Truman and MacArthur. By April 1951, they disagreed fundamentally on how to fight the Korean War. Truman wanted to keep the war limited, avoid expanding it into China, and prevent World War III with the Soviet Union. MacArthur wanted to bomb Chinese bases in Manchuria, blockade the Chinese coast, and use nationalist Chinese troops from Taiwan to open a second front. He possibly even wanted to use atomic bombs. For months, MacArthur had publicly contradicted presidential policy. He gave interviews criticizing Truman's strategy, sent letters to Republican congressmen attacking the administration, and issued a public statement in March 1951 that sabotaged Truman's planned peace initiative. He was openly defying his commander-in-chief. Truman finally had enough. On April 9th, he met with his top advisors. They all agreed MacArthur had to go. Even the Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed that his insubordination could not continue. On April 10th, Truman made his decision. MacArthur would be relieved of command. The plan was for Secretary of the Army Frank Pace, who was in Korea, to personally deliver the dismissal notice to MacArthur in Tokyo. But communication problems delayed this. Meanwhile, word was leaking in Washington. Reporters were asking questions, and Truman worried the story would break before MacArthur was officially notified. At 1 a.m. Washington time on April 11th, which was 1 a.m. April 12th in Tokyo, Truman authorized releasing the news to the press. The official orders were sent to MacArthur by commercial telegram, but they arrived after the news had already been broadcast. MacArthur learned he was fired from a reporter's phone call and a radio broadcast. It was a humiliating way to be dismissed, and Truman later admitted it was handled poorly. When MacArthur woke up that morning after his brief sleep, he faced the question of how to respond. He could denounce Truman, claim the dismissal was illegal, refuse to obey, or resign in protest. He did none of these things. His first official statement was brief and dignified. "I have just received your message relieving me of my commands. I comply at once." 12 words. No argument, no protest, no attempt to fight the decision. He accepted the dismissal immediately and completely. This shocked people who knew MacArthur. He was not known for accepting defeat gracefully. Famous for his massive ego and conviction that he was always right, many expected him to rage against the decision or claim political betrayal. But MacArthur understood something important. By accepting the dismissal with dignity, he maintained the moral high ground. The story became about Truman firing a great general, not about MacArthur refusing orders. By complying quietly, he made himself look like the victim of political persecution, rather than a general who had disobeyed his commander-in-chief. Over the next few days, MacArthur prepared to leave Tokyo. He had lived there for nearly 6 years, becoming almost a king in Japan, wielding more power than any American general had ever held in peacetime. Now he was leaving in disgrace, fired by a president whose approval rating was half of his own. But something unexpected was happening in America. The public reaction to MacArthur's firing was explosive. Millions were outraged. They saw Truman as a failed president firing a war hero, as political manipulation, appeasement of communism, betrayal. Republican politicians attacked Truman. Senator Joseph McCarthy said Truman must have made the decision while drunk. Senator Richard Nixon called for impeachment. Senator Robert Taft suggested European allies influenced the dismissal. State legislators passed resolutions condemning Truman. In California, flags flew at half-mast. Truman's approval rating dropped to 26%, one of the lowest ever recorded. Meanwhile, MacArthur was becoming a martyr. The general who had been fired was now elevated to heroic status. Cities planned parades. Congress prepared to invite him to address a joint session. MacArthur left Tokyo on April 16, 1951. Thousands of Japanese lined the streets to say goodbye. Many cried. His departure was treated almost like the end of an era. MacArthur's plane flew to Hawaii, then to San Francisco. At every stop, enormous crowds gathered. In San Francisco, over 500,000 people lined the streets for his motorcade, the largest crowd in the city's history. People held signs saying, "Welcome home and God bless MacArthur," and some said, "Impeach Truman." MacArthur had not yet given a major speech. He issued brief statements thanking people for their support, but had not attacked Truman directly. He was building anticipation, letting public sympathy grow, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came on April 19, 1951, when MacArthur addressed a joint session of Congress. It would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. The House chamber was packed with every senator and representative. Supreme Court justices were present. The cabinet attended, except for Secretary of State Dean Acheson and Secretary of Defense George Marshall, who refused to attend. Millions more listened on radio or television. MacArthur entered to thunderous applause, walking slowly to the podium with a serious, dignified bearing. He looked every inch the great general despite being out of uniform for the first time in decades. He spoke for 37 minutes, defending his conduct in Korea, explaining his strategy, and criticizing the Truman administration's approach without directly attacking Truman personally. He talked about the nature of war, stating, "In war, there is no substitute for victory," a direct repudiation of Truman's limited war strategy. He explained his belief that the war should be expanded, defended his record, and concluded with the emotional climax of his speech, reflecting on his 52 years of military service. Then he said the words that would be remembered forever. "I now close my military career and just fade away." An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. "Goodbye." The chamber erupted. Congressmen were crying. Hardened politicians had tears streaming down their faces. The applause lasted for minutes. Representative Dwayne Short later said, "We saw a great hunk of God in the flesh, and we heard the voice of God." It was theater, manipulation, and one of the greatest performances in American political history. MacArthur had turned his dismissal into martyrdom, himself into a heroic victim, and Truman into a villain, without directly attacking the president. The line about the old soldier fading away was borrowed from an old military tradition, but his delivery made it seem heartfelt and spontaneous. Over the next few weeks, MacArthur went on a speaking tour, giving speeches in multiple cities. The New York parade drew 7.5 million people, more than any parade in history. More people came to see MacArthur than Eisenhower after World War II. He defended his position on Korea, argued that the war could have been won if his strategy had been followed, and suggested political considerations had overridden military judgment. Yet he never directly called Truman a coward or communist sympathizer, staying just on the right side of propriety, letting supporters fill in harsher accusations. For a few months, it seemed MacArthur might ride public support to something bigger, including a potential 1952 presidential run. But as he continued speaking, his message began to wear thin. People started realizing that expanding the war with China and possibly using nuclear weapons risked World War III. Meanwhile, Senate Armed Services Committee hearings on his dismissal slowly shifted public opinion. Testimony from the Joint Chiefs of Staff was devastating, emphasizing MacArthur's insubordination and risky strategy. General Omar Bradley summarized that MacArthur's focus on Asia would involve the wrong war, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. By the summer of 1951, MacArthur's popularity faded. Talk of a presidential run evaporated. The Republican nomination went to Eisenhower, not MacArthur. MacArthur's keynote address at the convention was a disaster-long, grandiose, and poorly received. After 1952, he largely faded away, taking the corporate job, writing his memoirs, and giving occasional speeches. Looking back, MacArthur's response to being fired was masterful. His initial words, "Jeannie, we're going home at last," made him seem calm and resigned. His official compliance, "I comply at once," portrayed him as a soldier following orders. His speech to Congress, particularly the "old soldier fading away" line, turned dismissal into martyrdom and Truman into a villain. Yet his defiance of presidential authority ensured that, ultimately, he could not escape the consequences. The real lesson was clear. In America, the president commands, and generals obey.
Find stories like this as fascinating as I do. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks for watching.